Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UHS Defiance, watching the massive alien station grow larger on the main screen. 3 months had passed since humanity made first contact with what called itself the Galactic Council. 3 months of waiting for answers, for acceptance, for any sign that Earth would be welcomed into the greater community of intelligent life. Instead, they got silence. Then they got this summons. Captain, we're receiving their transmission, Communications Officer Pete Collins announced from his station. Put it on screen, Jake ordered, straightening his uniform. Around him, the bridge crew tensed. Everyone knew this meeting would decide humanity's future. The screen flickered, showing 12 different alien faces arranged in a semicircle. The central figure was tall and silver, with 4 arms and eyes that seemed to hold no warmth. When it spoke, its voice carried the weight of authority. I am High Arbiter Zexthul of the Galactic Council. We have reviewed your species extensively, humans of Earth. The alien paused, and Jake felt his stomach tighten. The verdict is unanimous. Humanity is classified as a Class 7 aggressive species. Your expansion beyond your home system is forbidden. Jake stepped forward. With respect, High Arbiter, we came in peace. We've shared our culture, our science, our willingness to cooperate. Your willingness to cooperate? Another alien, this one covered in blue scales, leaned forward. Your species has fought over 300 wars in the past century alone. You have weapons capable of destroying your own planet. You celebrate violence in your entertainment. We also create art, Jake replied firmly. We write poetry. We help the sick. We explore space to find new friends, not enemies. The silver alien's forearms moved in what might have been dismissal. Your aggressive nature cannot be contained. We have seen it before with 17 other species. They all claim to seek peace. They all became threats to galactic stability. What happened to those species? Jake asked, though he feared the answer. They learned to accept their limitations, the blue alien replied, as will you. The screen showed a new image, orbital platforms surrounding Earth, massive weapons pointed downward. Jake's blood ran cold as he recognized them as planet killers. Effective immediately, Earth and all human colonies will be placed under quarantine. Any ship attempting to leave designated human space will be destroyed. Any expansion beyond your current 17 systems will result in total sterilization. Jake felt anger rising in his chest, hot and fierce. You can't do this. We have rights. We have the right to exist freely. Rights are earned through wisdom and restraint, Zexthul said coldly. Humans possess neither. This decision is final. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Back on Earth, Admiral Lisa Carter received Jake's report in her office at Naval Command. She was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that had seen too many battles. As she listened, her jaw tightened with each word. How long before their blockade is in position? She asked when Jake finished. Our scouts estimate 2 weeks, Admiral. They're moving platforms to every human system. Lisa stood and walked to the window, overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Somewhere up there, alien weapons were being aimed at her homeworld, at her children, at every human being who had ever looked up at the stars and dreamed of what lay beyond. Contact Dr. Rodriguez immediately, she ordered. I want every piece of information we have about these council species, their technology, their weaknesses, everything. An hour later, Dr. Alex Rodriguez burst into the Admiral's office carrying a tablet loaded with data. He was young for a xenobiologist, barely 30, but his mind was sharp as a blade. Admiral, you need to see this, he said, his voice shaking with excitement and fear. I've been analyzing their databases, the ones they shared during the cultural exchange. They think they wiped our copies, but I kept backups. He set the tablet on her desk, showing star charts marked in red. These are what they call pacified systems. 23 different species over the past 2,000 years. The Council doesn't just quarantine aggressive races, Admiral. They eliminate them. Lisa studied the data, her heart sinking. How? Different methods. Some are hit with biological weapons that only target their DNA. Others have their planet's atmospheres poisoned. A few lucky ones just get their technology destroyed and are left on their home worlds to die slowly. And the ones that survive? Alex's face was grim. They become slave species. The Velthari used to have a stellar empire spanning 40 systems. Now they're janitors on council stations. The Creeks were master builders. Now they maintain council ships and never speak unless spoken to. Lisa felt something cold settle in her stomach. They're planning to destroy us. Not immediately, Alex said. Their pattern is to wait about 5 years. Let the quarantined species think they're safe. Then they strike. By the time the blockade goes up, they've already decided we're going to die. Lisa stood and walked to her communications console. She entered a code that would connect her directly to President Sam Taylor. "Mr. President," she said when his face appeared on screen, "I need to speak with you immediately. And sir, you're going to want to sit down for this." 3 hours later, President Taylor addressed the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the heads of the intelligence agencies, and the leaders of every major spacefaring corporation. His words were simple but carried the weight of extinction. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are alone. We are outnumbered. And if we do nothing, we are dead." He showed them Alex's data, the evidence of council genocide, the orbital weapons already moving into position. When he finished, the room was silent except for the hum of air recyclers. "Options?" the president asked. General Matt Davis, head of Space Command, spoke first. "We fight. We hit them before they hit us." "With what?" asked Treasury Secretary Carol White. "They have technology centuries ahead of ours." "They have better technology," Admiral Carter said quietly. "But they've never fought humans. They've never faced a species that fought 300 wars in a century and still managed to reach the stars." President Taylor looked around the room, meeting every eye. "Dr. Rodriguez, in your analysis of these pacified species, did any of them fight back?" Alex shook his head. "No, sir. They all tried to negotiate to prove they were peaceful. They let the council set the terms." "Then we do something different," the president said. "We don't wait for them to kill us in 5 years. We don't try to prove we're peaceful. We show them exactly what a Class 7 aggressive species can do when it's fighting for its survival." He stood, his decision made. "Operation Breakthrough is approved. Admiral Carter, you have full authorization to use any and all resources. Dr. Rodriguez, I want everything we know about their technology and their weaknesses on Admiral Carter's desk by tomorrow morning." President Taylor looked out the window, at the night sky where alien weapons were moving into position to murder his species. "They want to see human aggression?" he said quietly. "Then let's give them a war they'll never forget." The die was cast. Humanity would not go quietly into the dark. Commander Ryan Brooks gripped the arms of his captain's chair as the UHS Thunder dropped out of hyperspace. Around him, 50 human warships materialized from the void, their weapons already charging. Ahead of them lay the Kepler 442 station, a massive structure that served as the Council's primary military hub in this sector. "All ships report ready, Commander," his tactical officer announced. Ryan nodded, thinking of his wife and daughter, back on Mars. They were counting on him just like every other human in the 17 systems was counting on the fleet. The Council had given humanity 2 weeks to prepare for extinction. They were about to learn that 2 weeks was plenty of time for humans to get angry. "This is Commander Brooks to all ships," he announced over the fleet channel. "Remember, they think we're primitives. They think we'll fight like the other species. They've crushed. Show them what human creativity looks like." The Council station was beautiful in its alien way, all flowing curves and crystal spires. It was also completely unprepared for what was coming. Ryan could see their defense platforms moving slowly into position, their shields coming online with the casual confidence of a species that had never lost a battle. "Captain Walsh, you're clear for your run," Ryan announced. 3 kilometers away, Captain Nina Walsh smiled grimly as she received the order. Her ship, the UHS Meteor, was the oldest vessel in the fleet. Her engines were held together with spare parts and prayer, and her hull had been patched so many times it looked like a quilt. But she was fast, and more importantly, Nina was completely insane. "All hands brace for impact," she announced to her crew. Then she cut the safety protocols and pushed her engines past their red line. The Meteor streaked toward the station like a bullet, her hull glowing from atmospheric friction as she tore through the station's defensive screens. The Council defenders fired frantically, but their weapons were designed for long-range battles between civilized opponents. They had never faced someone crazy enough to use their ship as a battering ram. Nina's ship punched through the station's outer hull like it was made of paper. Emergency lights flashed as atmosphere vented into space, and the station's power grid fluctuated wildly. In the chaos, the rest of the human fleet struck. Lieutenant Colonel Chris Parker led the first boarding parties through the breach Nina had created. His Marines moved through the station's corridors like wolves, their weapons adapted for the close-quarters fighting that the Council species had forgotten existed. The aliens had grown soft in their technological superiority, used to fighting battles from the safety of their command centers. Chris kicked down a door and found himself face-to-face with a group of insectoid Creek soldiers. They were tall, elegant creatures with compound eyes and arms that moved like dancers. They were also completely unprepared for the human who came through their door screaming and firing. "Remember what they did to your people," Chris shouted, as he fought. The Creeks had been builders once, artists who created structures that sang in the wind. Now they were slaves, their creativity crushed under the Council's boot. Some of them remembered, and Chris saw recognition in their compound eyes before they turned their weapons on their own commanders. Throughout the station, similar scenes played out as human soldiers fought with a ferocity that shocked their enemies. Engineer Betty Johnson crawled through maintenance shafts, placing explosive charges with the precision of a surgeon. She had grown up poor in Detroit, learning to fix anything with scraps and determination. Now those skills served her as she turned the station's own systems against it. "Betty to command," she whispered into her radio. "I've got eyes on their main reactor. These idiots put their primary power source right in the center of the station with minimal shielding. I can bring this whole place down." "Negative," came the reply from Commander Brooks. "We need that station intact. Can you just knock out their weapons?" Betty grinned in the darkness. "Sir, I can knock out whatever you want. These aliens build pretty, but they don't build smart." She worked quickly, her hands moving over alien technology that somehow made sense once she understood the basic principles. The Council species had advanced far beyond humans in many ways, but they had forgotten the fundamental rule that any Detroit mechanic knew: keep it simple, because complex things break. 20 minutes later, the station's weapon systems went dark. Its shields flickered and died. Its communication arrays fell silent. Betty had turned the pride of the Council fleet into a floating metal sculpture. On the bridge of his flagship, High Arbiter Zexthul watched his tactical display in growing horror. Red lights blinked everywhere as human ships swarmed his station, like angry insects. His forearms moved frantically over his control panels, trying to coordinate a defense against an enemy that fought like nothing he had ever encountered. "Status report," he demanded. 17 breaches in the outer hull, his tactical officer reported, his voice shaking. "Human soldiers are fighting in corridors 7 through 23. They're not following standard boarding protocols. They're using explosive devices, chemical weapons, and..." He paused, his voice filled with disbelief. "They appear to be using their own bodies as weapons." Zexthul's eyes widened. He had studied 17 different species that the Council had pacified. Over the centuries, all of them had followed predictable patterns, using recognized tactics that could be countered with established procedures. These humans fought like madmen. "Deploy the security robots," he ordered. "Sir, they're not responding. Someone has taken control of our computer systems." In the station's medical bay, Tom Anderson worked frantically to save wounded soldiers. He was a medic, not a fighter, but he had volunteered for this mission because someone had to patch up the heroes. Around him, injured Marines joked and cursed as he treated their wounds, already asking when they could get back to the fight. "Doc, how long before I can use this arm again?" asked a sergeant with a plasma burn across his shoulder. 2 weeks, with proper rest," Tom replied as he applied synthetic skin to the wound. "How about 2 hours with improper rest?" Tom looked at the young soldier's determined face and sighed. "Take these painkillers and try not to get killed. And don't blame me when that arm hurts for the next year." The fighting continued for 6 hours. Human soldiers pushed deeper into the station, overwhelming defensive positions with tactics the Council had never seen. They fought in small groups, using speed and aggression to overcome superior numbers. They adapted quickly to alien technology, turning captured weapons against their former owners. By the time the station's command center fell, High Arbiter Zexthul had lost nearly half his forces. He stood surrounded by human soldiers, his arms raised in surrender, staring at Commander Brooks with something approaching respect. "Your species fights without honor," he said finally. Ryan Brooks looked at the alien commander and thought of the orbital weapons still pointing at Earth, of the extinction order that had been passed down like a casual business decision. "Honor is a luxury for species that aren't fighting for their lives," he replied. "You declared war on humanity. This is what war with humans looks like." As the UHS Thunder docked with the captured station, Ryan sent a message back to Earth. 3 words that would change the course of galactic history. First target secured. The storm had begun, and the Council was about to learn that humanity's reputation for violence had been greatly underestimated. The news spread through the galaxy like wildfire. High Arbiter Zexthul's defeat at Kepler 442 was impossible to hide, especially when human ships began broadcasting on every frequency they could find. Ambassador Carol White stood before the captured Council communication array, her image being transmitted to every inhabited system in the galaxy. Carol was a diplomat, not a soldier, but she had volunteered for this role because someone needed to speak for humanity. She was also a mother of 3 who had watched alien weapons move into position over her children's heads, which gave her words a particular edge. "People of the galaxy," she began, her voice steady and calm. "I am Ambassador Carol White, representing the human species of Earth. 3 days ago, the Galactic Council declared our extinction. Today, we declared our disagreement with that decision." She gestured to the ruined command center behind her, where Council officers sat under human guard. "We did not choose this war. We came to the galaxy seeking friends and found executioners. We offered peace and received death sentences. But we are not the 17 species that came before us. We will not quietly accept genocide." The transmission showed footage from the battle, human soldiers fighting with desperate courage against overwhelming odds. Carol's voice continued over the images. "To the Council member species, we offer you one chance. Withdraw your weapons from human space. Cancel your extermination orders. Return to your homes and leave us alone." She paused, letting the weight of her next word sink in. "To those who refuse, know this. We are coming. We will not stop until every Council station is captured, every Council fleet is destroyed, and every Council leader is brought to justice. You started this war. We will finish it." The transmission ended, leaving the galaxy in stunned silence. On the water world of Velthar Prime, the aquatic delegates floated in their council chambers, their gill slits fluttering with anxiety. The Velthari had once ruled 40 star systems before the Council reduced them to servitude. Now they watched the humans do something they had never imagined possible: fight back and win. Elder Aquartel, his ancient scales scarred from decades of Council punishment, spoke first. "The humans have done what we could not. They have made the Council bleed. They will be destroyed for it," another elder replied. "The Council has resources we cannot imagine. This victory is temporary." "Perhaps," Aquartel said quietly. "But they have shown that the Council is not invincible. For the first time in 2,000 years, a species has said no to our oppressors and made it stick." Within hours, the Velthari government issued a statement declaring neutrality in the conflict between humans and the Council. It was a small act of defiance, but it was the first crack in the Council's absolute authority. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. On Kriek's worlds, worker drones who had spent generations as slaves began to whisper among themselves. On peaceful worlds that had submitted to Council rule, populations began to ask dangerous questions about their government's actions. Captain Sophie Turner monitored these developments from her intelligence vessel, the UHS Shadow. Sophie was a former CIA operative who had volunteered for humanity's most dangerous mission, spying on Council communications deep in enemy territory. Her ship was small, fast, and virtually invisible to most scanning systems. "Captain, we're intercepting massive communication traffic between Council worlds," her communications officer reported. "They're panicking. Some species are demanding explanations, others are preparing their own defensive measures." Sophie smiled grimly. Fear was a weapon as powerful as any gun, and right now the Council was learning what it felt like to be afraid. But as she listened to the intercepted messages, she began to hear references to something else, something that made her blood run cold. "The silence," she whispered, reading the translated text on her screen. "They keep mentioning something called the silence." Her xenolinguist, Dr. Pete Morrison, looked up from his translation console. "I've been tracking that phrase, Captain. It appears in Council communications from the highest levels, always in connection with something called the ancient protocols and dimensional containment." "Any idea what it means?" Pete shook his head. "Not yet. But whatever it is, it's got the Council leadership more scared than our attacks do." Meanwhile, General Matt Davis coordinated the second wave of human strikes from his command center on Luna. Red dots marked Council positions across 3 star systems, while blue dots showed human fleets moving into position. The mathematics were simple and brutal. Humanity was outnumbered 1,000 to 1, but they were fighting with the desperation of a species facing extinction. "Status on the Rigel assault?" he asked his aide. "Admiral Phillips reports the outer defenses are down. She expects to have the station within 12 hours. Matt nodded, but his satisfaction was tempered by the intelligence reports flowing in from Sophie Turner's team. The Council wasn't just a military alliance. It was a government that had ruled the galaxy for millennia. They had resources, allies, and weapons that humanity couldn't even imagine. Winning a few battles was one thing. Winning a war against an entire galactic civilization was another. His thoughts were interrupted by an urgent communication from Earth. President Taylor's face appeared on his screen, grim with worry. "General, we've received a formal response from the Council. They're offering to negotiate." Matt felt his heart leap with hope, then crash back to Earth when he saw the President's expression. "That's good news, isn't it, sir?" "Read their terms," the President said, forwarding the document. Matt scanned the alien text, translated by humanity's best computers. The Council offered to reduce humanity's punishment from extinction to slavery. They would be allowed to survive as a managed species, under Council supervision. Their technology would be confiscated, their population controlled, their worlds turned into labor camps. "They still think they're going to win," Matt said quietly. "Yes, they do." "And Matt?" "They might be right. Our latest intelligence suggests they have reserve fleets we haven't even seen yet. We've won a few battles, but the war is just beginning." On the bridge of the captured Council station, Commander Brooks received reports from human forces across the galaxy. They had taken 17 Council installations in 3 days, captured thousands of enemy soldiers, and seized enough alien technology to advance human science by decades. By any measure, it was a stunning victory. But Ryan knew it wasn't enough. The Council controlled thousands of star systems, commanded millions of ships, and ruled over species with technologies humanity couldn't comprehend. They had won the opening battles through surprise and desperation, but that advantage wouldn't last forever. His tactical officer interrupted his brooding. "Sir, we're detecting massive energy signatures throughout Council space. It looks like they're mobilizing their main fleets." Ryan looked at the tactical display, watching as red dots began to multiply across the galaxy. The Council was done playing games. They were bringing their full military might to bear on the upstart humans who dared to challenge their authority. "Signal, all human forces," he ordered. "Phase 2 of Operation Breakthrough is now active. All ships are to withdraw to predetermined positions and prepare for the real war." As human ships began their tactical retreat, carrying captured technology and liberated slaves back to human space, Ryan allowed himself one moment of pride. They had done the impossible. They had made the galaxy's supreme power take humanity seriously. Now came the hard part. They had to survive what was coming next. In his private chambers aboard the Council's greatest battleship, High Arbiter Zexthal studied reports from the human attacks. These creatures fought like nothing he had ever encountered, with a combination of tactical intelligence and berserker fury that defied all military doctrine. But they were still primitives, still vastly outnumbered, still doomed to fail. The Council controlled resources built up over 2 millennia of absolute rule. Once the reserve fleets were deployed, the humans would be crushed like all the others. Still, something nagged at him as he reviewed the battle reports. In all his years of pacifying aggressive species, he had never seen anything like this. The humans fought as if they had nothing to lose and everything to gain. They adapted to new situations with frightening speed, turned their enemies' advantages against them, and seemed to thrive on chaos. For the first time in his long career, Zexthul wondered if the Council might have made a mistake in provoking this particular species. But it was too late for such thoughts now. The die was cast, the fleets were moving, and the galaxy would soon learn whether the Council's 2,000 years of supremacy could withstand the fury of humanity unleashed. 3 months after the first human attack, Admiral Kate Phillips stood on the bridge of the captured Council flagship Eternal Dominion. The massive vessel, once the pride of the Galactic Fleet, now flew under human colors. Around her, the remnants of the Council's military command waited in defeated silence. The war had been shorter than anyone expected. Human forces, fighting with desperate creativity and absolute determination, had struck at Council infrastructure with surgical precision. While the aliens mobilized their massive fleets for traditional battles, humans had targeted supply lines, communication networks, and civilian leadership. By the time the Council realized they were fighting a completely different kind of war, their government had collapsed. High Arbiter Zexthul, Kate said formally, on behalf of the United Human Systems, I accept your unconditional surrender. The tall silver alien's forearms moved in what his species considered a gesture of defeat. The Council submits to human authority, he said, his voice heavy with centuries of lost pride. We request mercy for our civilian populations. Kate nodded. Humanity had not become monsters in their fight for survival. Civilian populations will be protected. War criminals will face justice. But your military forces will be disbanded, and your weapons of mass destruction will be destroyed. As the formal surrender proceeded, Dr. Paul Martinez worked frantically in the flagship's data core. The captured Council databases contained the accumulated knowledge of dozens of species spanning millennia. Paul was a computer scientist who had volunteered to crack alien encryption systems, and what he had found in the deepest archives made his hands shake. Admiral, he called over the intercom, I need to speak with you immediately. And ma'am, you're going to want to see this privately. An hour later, Kate stood in the secured data chamber, staring at holographic displays that showed impossible things. Paul's face was pale as he explained what he had discovered. The Council wasn't just maintaining galactic order, Admiral. They were maintaining a defensive perimeter against something they called the Silence or the Devourers. Look at this. The hologram showed a galactic map with a red zone spanning nearly a quarter of known space. Within that zone, star systems were marked as lost and consumed or simply empty. What happened to those systems? Kate asked. According to these records, they encountered entities that don't just destroy civilizations, they consume them. Every living mind, every piece of consciousness, absorbed into something that the Council scientists could barely understand. Paul brought up another display showing ancient battle reports. 1,500 years ago, these entities controlled half the galaxy. The Council formed specifically to fight them, to create a defensive barrier that would keep them contained. Kate felt ice form in her stomach. Contained how? Dimensional prison. The Council worked with species that are now extinct to trap the Devourers in a pocket dimension. The barriers require constant maintenance, constant monitoring. Paul's voice dropped to a whisper. Admiral, we've been destroying their monitoring stations. We've been capturing the scientists who maintain the containment systems. The implications hit Kate like a physical blow. Humanity's victory over the Council might have doomed the entire galaxy. Meanwhile, Captain Frank Lopez led an exploration team through the corridors of Research Station Omega-7, a massive facility that had been abandoned so quickly that meals were still sitting on tables. Frank was a former Navy SEAL who specialized in boarding actions, but this felt different. The station was too quiet, too empty. Motion sensors are picking up nothing, his technical officer reported. But life support is still running, and the computers are active. They found the research labs first, filled with equipment that hurt to look at directly. Alien scientists had been studying things that seemed to bend reality around them, artifacts covered in symbols that made human eyes water. Security Chief Mary Clark, a former FBI agent, documented everything with professional calm, but Frank could see the tension in her movements. "Captain?" she called from the main laboratory. "You need to see this." Frank joined her at a sealed vault, its walls covered in warnings in dozens of different languages. The universal translator worked overtime, producing the same message repeatedly. "Never wake the devourers. Death sleeps here. End of all thought." The vault was sealed from the outside, Mary reported. "But look at these energy readings. Something tried to break out recently. The containment field fluctuated for 47 seconds before stabilizing." Frank studied the data, his military mind processing the implications. "When?" 3 days. It go right around the time we captured the Council's main communication hub. The exploration continued deeper into the station, revealing laboratories dedicated to studying things that shouldn't exist. Frank's team found research notes describing entities that could replicate human appearance while consuming human consciousness, beings that existed partially outside normal space-time, and worst of all, evidence that the dimensional barriers were weakening. "Sir," his communications officer called urgently, "we're receiving a distress signal. It's from the UHS Guardian on patrol near the barrier zone." Frank felt his blood chill. Commander Rick Stevens was one of the best officers in the human fleet, and the Guardian was a state-of-the-art reconnaissance vessel. "What's their status?" "They report strange sensor readings and, sir, they say their crew is acting oddly. That was their last coherent transmission. Now they're just sending coordinates and a repeating message. Don't come here, don't look, don't think." Back on Earth, President Taylor convened an emergency session of his advisors. The victory over the Council should have been humanity's greatest triumph, but the captured intelligence had turned celebration into terror. Dr. Alex Rodriguez, now promoted to head of xenobiological research, presented his analysis to the assembled leaders. "The entities we're dealing with aren't just aliens," he said. "There's something fundamentally different. They exist by consuming consciousness itself, growing stronger with every mind they absorb." "How is that possible?" asked Treasury Secretary Carol White. "We don't know. The Council's best scientists spent centuries studying them and never fully understood what they were fighting. What we do know is that they're patient, intelligent, and absolutely hostile to all forms of sentient life." General Matt Davis leaned forward. "What are our defensive options?" Alex's expression was grim. "According to the Council records, there aren't any. Every species that encountered the Devourers was either consumed or fled. The only reason they were contained was because 50 different civilizations worked together to build a prison that spanned multiple dimensions. And we've been systematically destroying the people who maintained that prison," President Taylor said quietly. Dr. Helen Gray, a neuropsychologist brought in to study the captured records, spoke for the first time. "There's something else. The reports from the Guardian mention crew members acting strangely. The Council archives describe similar incidents. The Devourers don't just consume consciousness, they can influence it from a distance. They can make people serve them without the victims even realizing what's happening." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity had fought a war to prevent their extinction, only to discover they might have caused something infinitely worse. "How long do we have?" President Taylor asked. Alex consulted his notes. "The dimensional barriers are weakening. Without proper maintenance, they could fail completely within months. When that happens..." He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "When that happens, we face the real apex predator of the galaxy," General Davis said grimly. "And we'll be facing them alone." President Taylor stood and walked to the window, looking up at stars that suddenly seemed cold and hostile. Humanity had achieved the impossible. They had conquered a galactic empire. But in doing so, they might have unleashed something that would make their extinction seem merciful by comparison. Recall all human forces to defensive positions, he ordered. Begin working with surviving council scientists to understand the containment systems, and prepare our people for the possibility that our real war is just beginning. Outside, the stars continue to shine, but somewhere in the dark between galaxies, ancient intelligences that fed on thought itself began to stir. The barriers that had contained them for 15 centuries were weakening, and the species that had defeated their jailers was about to learn why the galaxy had needed jailers at all. Humanity had won their war for survival. Now they would discover that survival itself was about to become infinitely more difficult. The first Devourer ship appeared at the edge of human space on a Tuesday morning, local Earth time. Lieutenant Amy Foster was on routine patrol aboard the UHS Vigilant when her sensors detected something that shouldn't exist. "Captain Johnson," she called to her commanding officer. "I'm reading a massive energy signature dropping out of hyperspace near the Tau Ceti barrier station, but sir, it's not showing up on visual." Captain Bobby Johnson moved to the sensor station, his weathered face creasing with concern. Bobby had been fighting council forces for months, and he knew the difference between normal sensor ghosts and something genuinely wrong. What he saw on the displays made his stomach turn. "That can't be right," he muttered. "Nothing's that big." The object was easily the size of a city, but it seemed to bend space around itself in ways that hurt to think about. When Amy tried to focus the visual sensors on it, the image wavered like a heat mirage, showing shapes that didn't quite make sense. "Sir, I'm getting a distress signal from the barrier station," the communications officer announced. "They report that their monitoring equipment is going crazy. Dimensional readings are off the charts." Bobby had read the briefings about the Devourers, the classified reports that President Taylor had distributed to all ship commanders. He had hoped never to encounter the entities described in those nightmarish files. "Signal Fleet Command immediately. Tell them we have a code black situation at Tau Ceti." 3 hours later, Commander Rick Stevens arrived with the UHS Guardian, humanity's most advanced reconnaissance vessel. Rick was a career officer who had volunteered for the most dangerous assignments throughout the war with the Council. He was also a man who prided himself on staying calm under pressure. That pride lasted exactly 17 minutes after the Guardian entered sensor range of the alien vessel. "Commander," his science officer, Dr. Linda Walsh, reported, her voice strained, "I'm detecting energy patterns that don't match anything in our database. The ship appears to be constructed from some kind of organic material, but it's also showing characteristics of advanced technology." Rick studied the readings, trying to make sense of data that seemed to contradict itself. The alien vessel was massive, clearly artificial, but it pulsed like something alive. Worse, his crew was beginning to report strange experiences. "Sir," his navigator, Lieutenant Tim Brooks, called out, "I keep seeing movement in my peripheral vision, but when I turn to look, nothing's there." "Same here," added the weapons officer, "and I'm hearing whispers in languages I don't recognize." Rick felt a chill run down his spine. The Council archives had mentioned similar symptoms among crews that encountered Devourer vessels. "All hands, maintain radio contact at all times. If anyone experiences unusual thoughts or behaviors, report immediately." But it was already too late. Dr. Walsh was the first to be affected. She stood at her science station, her hands moving over the controls with mechanical precision, but her eyes had become distant and unfocused. When Rick tried to speak to her, she turned toward him with a smile that was perfectly human and completely wrong. "The data is fascinating, Commander," she said in a voice that sounded exactly like Linda, but carried undertones of something vast and hungry. "We're learning so much about your species." Rick backed away from her, his hand moving to his sidearm. "Linda, I need you to step away from your station." "Why would I do that?" she asked, tilting her head at an angle no human neck should achieve. "I'm exactly where I need to be." The infection spread through the crew like wildfire. One by one, Rick watched his people become puppets, their bodies moving normally while their minds were consumed by something that used their voices to speak. They continued performing their duties with mechanical efficiency, but they were no longer human in any way that mattered. Rick barricaded himself in his ready room and sent a desperate message to Fleet Command. Guardian to base. Crew compromised. Something is taking control of their minds. Do not approach. Repeat, do not approach. The stories about the Devourers are true. The transmission cut off abruptly. Back on Earth, Dr. Helen Gray received the data from the Guardian, with growing horror. As a neuropsychologist, she had studied the Council's files on Devourer encounters, but seeing it happen to human beings was infinitely worse than reading about it in alien reports. They don't just kill, she explained to the emergency session of military leaders. They consume consciousness while leaving the body intact. The victims become extensions of the Devourer hive mind, retaining all their knowledge and skills, but serving an alien will. Admiral Carter leaned forward in her chair. Can the process be reversed? Helen shook her head. According to the Council archives, no. Once consciousness is consumed, it's gone forever. The body continues to function, but the person inside is dead. General Davis studied the tactical reports with the eye of a career soldier. How do we fight something like this? The Council tried everything, Helen replied. Energy weapons, nuclear devices, biological warfare. Nothing worked. The Devourer ship seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time. Conventional attacks pass right through them. President Taylor's voice was grim when he spoke. What about the crew of the Guardian? Are they still alive? Helen consulted her notes. Physically, yes, they're probably still performing their duties aboard the ship. But mentally, they're gone. The entities wearing their faces have access to all their memories, all their knowledge about human military capabilities. The implications were staggering. The Devourers now had a human crew with detailed knowledge of fleet positions, defense, systems, and tactical procedures. Worse, they could use that crew to infiltrate other human ships, spreading the infection through direct contact. 2 days later, the Guardian was found drifting in space near the Mars orbital shipyards. Lieutenant Amy Foster, promoted to captain after her previous commanding officer's nervous breakdown, led the investigation aboard the corvette UHS Wasp. Life signs are normal throughout the ship, her scanner operator reported. The crew appears to be alive and healthy. Amy felt her skin crawl. Maintain distance. Use remote drones for initial reconnaissance. The drones revealed a scene from a nightmare. The crew of the Guardian sat at their stations, working with quiet efficiency. They looked perfectly normal, but there was something wrong with their movements, too precise and coordinated. When the drones entered the bridge, Commander Stevens looked up and smiled directly at the camera. "Hello, Captain Foster," he said, his voice carrying across the communication link. "Thank you for coming to check on us. We're doing very well." Amy's blood ran cold. Stevens looked exactly like the man she had known, but his eyes held depths that human eyes should not possess. "Rick, what's your status?" "We've learned so much," Stevens replied, his smile never wavering. "About your species, your culture, your fears. We understand humans now in ways you cannot imagine. We're coming aboard to assist you," Amy lied, buying time while her crew prepared to retreat. Stevens laughed, and the sound held harmonics that made Amy's teeth ache. "That won't be necessary, Captain. We'll come to you instead. We have so much knowledge to share." Amy watched in horror as the Guardian began moving toward her ship with impossible smoothness, its engines showing no heat signature despite its acceleration. "All hands, emergency jump, get us out of here now." The Wasp escaped into hyperspace just as the Guardian reached weapons range, but Amy knew they had learned something terrible. The Devourers could perfectly mimic human behavior, accessing memories and personalities with flawless accuracy. Anyone could be compromised, and there would be no way to tell until it was too late. As her ship raced back to Earth with its horrifying report, Amy couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The crew around her looked normal, acted normal, spoke with familiar voices. But somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice whispered that normal could be the most terrifying thing of all. The war with the Council had been fought with ships and weapons, tactics and strategy. But this new conflict would be fought with minds and souls, and humanity was facing an enemy that had perfected the art of stealing both. In the depths of space, More devourer ships began to emerge from tiers in reality itself. Each one carried the accumulated consciousness of entire civilizations, billions of minds subsumed into a collective intelligence that viewed the galaxy as nothing more than food. They had been patient for 15 centuries, but their prison was weakening, and the species that had broken their chains was about to learn what true predation looked like. The age of humanity's dominance was ending before it had truly begun. The real war was just starting. Commander Dan Miller's research facility on Titan looked more like a fortress than a laboratory. Reinforced walls, armed guards, and isolation chambers surrounded the most dangerous project in human history, attempting to understand an enemy that consumed minds for sustenance. Dan was a career military scientist who had volunteered for the assignment, despite knowing it would probably cost him his sanity. Around him, the brightest minds from both humanity and the surviving council, species worked desperately to find some weakness in beings that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia. "The neural scans confirm our worst fears," announced Dr. Steve Robinson, examining readouts from a captured devourer artifact. Steve was a neurosurgeon who had been studying brain patterns since the first encounters. These entities don't just consume consciousness. They absorb it completely, integrating every memory, every skill, every personality trait into their collective intelligence. Aquartel, the elderly Velthari scientist who had defected to help humanity, floated in his specialized tank nearby. His scarred scales rippled with distress as he translated ancient texts. "My people have legends about the first hunger," he gurgled through his translator. "They speak of beings who could steal souls, leaving empty shells that walked and talked but held no spark of life." "How accurate are your legends?" Dan asked. "Too accurate," Aquartel replied. "The stories describe exactly what we've observed. The devourers feed on sentient thought itself, growing stronger with each mind they consume. A single entity that has absorbed 1,000,000 consciousness becomes 1,000,000 times more intelligent, more creative, more dangerous." Dr. Lisa Park, humanities, leading expert on quantum consciousness, looked up from her research. "I've been analyzing the energy patterns from devourer encounters. They're not just advanced technology. These beings exist partially outside our normal spacetime, which is why conventional weapons can't harm them." "But they can harm us," Dan said grimly. "Captain Adams, what's the latest from the evacuation fleets?" Captain Julie Adams, coordinating. The desperate retreat from 17 colony worlds appeared on the main screen from her flagship. Behind her, status boards showed the grim mathematics of humanity's flight. 6 billion people fleeing before an enemy they couldn't fight. "We've successfully evacuated 12 worlds," Julie reported. "But the devourers aren't just attacking military targets. They're methodically consuming civilian populations, starting with the most intelligent individuals, scientists, artists, leaders. They're harvesting human creativity." The strategic implications were terrifying. The devourers weren't just eliminating humanity. They were stealing everything that made humanity unique and incorporating it into their own vast intelligence. "Any pattern to their attacks?" Dan asked. Julie's expression darkened. "They're learning from each encounter. The first world they hit, New Geneva, they attacked directly. By the time they reached Kepler Colony, they were using infiltration tactics, sending converted humans to sabotage defense systems from within." Steve Robinson pulled up holographic displays showing brain scans from survivors of devourer encounters. "The few people who've escaped direct contact show severe neurological trauma. It's like something tried to reach into their minds and got interrupted. They describe hearing voices that aren't there, seeing faces in mirrors that aren't their own." "What about psychological defenses?" Dan asked. "Meditation, mental conditioning, anything that might provide protection?" Dr. Helen Gray, participating via secure video link from Earth, shook her head. "I've tested every technique we know. The devourers seem to bypass conscious thought entirely, attacking the quantum structures that generate consciousness itself. It's not something you can resist through willpower." The research continued for weeks, each discovery more horrifying than the last. They learned that the devourers could replicate not just human appearance and behavior, but human emotions, relationships, and cultural knowledge. A converted human would remember loving their family, serving their country, believing in their cause, but all those memories would serve an alien intelligence that viewed humanity as livestock. Worse, the entities were patient and intelligent, beyond human comprehension. They had spent 15 centuries studying their prison, learning about every species that had participated in their containment. They understood human psychology, human tactics, human weaknesses better than humans, understood themselves. "We found something in the deep archives," Aquartel announced during one of their daily briefings. His tank bubbled with agitation as he displayed ancient council records. The Devourers weren't always what they are now. Millions of years ago, they were a normal species, perhaps not unlike yours, but they discovered a way to transfer consciousness between bodies to achieve immortality by jumping from host to host. "What went wrong?" Dan asked. "They became addicted to the process," the Velthari elder explained. "Each transfer gave them access to new knowledge, new experiences, new ways of thinking. Eventually, they stopped caring about preserving the host minds and began consuming them entirely. Over millions of years, they transformed from a species seeking immortality into a force of nature that devours consciousness itself. The revelation that the Devourers had once been people like themselves added a new dimension of horror to humanity's situation. These weren't alien monsters beyond understanding. They were the ultimate expression of the drive for knowledge and power, taken to its logical extreme. "Is there any record of anyone successfully fighting them?" Steve asked. Aquartel's response was devastating. "No species has ever defeated them in direct combat. The coalition that imprisoned them succeeded only by working together to build a prison that exists outside normal reality. Even then, it cost 50 different civilizations everything they had. Most of the species involved went extinct from the effort." Dan felt the weight of despair settling on his team. Humanity faced an enemy that had consumed entire galactic civilizations, beings so advanced that the greatest minds in the galaxy had barely managed to contain them. And now those containment systems were failing. "There has to be something," he said desperately. "Some weakness, some flaw we can exploit." "Perhaps," said a new voice from the laboratory entrance. Everyone turned to see Dr. Laura Young, a quantum physicist who had been working on theoretical models of consciousness transfer. She looked exhausted but excited, carrying a tablet loaded with equations that hurt to look at. "I've been analyzing the quantum signatures from Devourer encounters," she announced. "These entities have achieved something we thought was impossible. They've created a stable quantum consciousness that can exist independently of biological substrate. That's what makes them so dangerous," Steve pointed out. "But also what might make them vulnerable," Laura replied. "Any quantum system, no matter how stable, has resonance frequencies. If we could find the right frequency, we might be able to disrupt their consciousness matrices." Dan felt a spark of hope for the first time in weeks. "What would we need?" Laura's expression became grim. "A quantum consciousness generator powerful enough to affect entities that have absorbed millions of minds. We'd essentially need to create our own collective intelligence to match theirs." "Using what minds?" Dan asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. "Human minds," Laura said quietly. "Volunteers who would link their consciousness together to create a temporary hive mind capable of fighting the Devourers on their own level." The laboratory fell silent as the implications sank in. To defeat the ultimate predator of consciousness, humanity might have to sacrifice their individual consciousness, becoming the very thing they feared in order to destroy it. Outside the laboratory, Devourer ships continued their methodical advance through human space. With each world they consumed, they grew stronger, more intelligent, more capable of understanding and countering human resistance. Time was running out, and humanity's options were narrowing to a single terrible choice: become monsters to fight monsters, or face extinction at the hands of beings that would use their stolen minds to torment the galaxy for eternity. The nature of the enemy was clear now. The question was whether humanity had the courage to become something equally unnatural in response. Admiral Ben Murphy stood in the war room beneath Cheyenne Mountain, staring at a holographic map that showed the death of human civilization. 17 colony worlds had fallen silent in the past month. Mars had been evacuated 3 days ago. Now Earth itself lay in the path of the advancing Devourer fleet, humanity's last refuge in a galaxy that had become a hunting ground. Ben was a veteran of the war with the Council, but this was different. Against the Council they had fought ships and soldiers, beings they could understand and defeat. The Devourers were something else entirely, a force of nature that consumed souls and grew stronger with every victory. "Status report," he ordered, though he already knew the numbers would be grim. Colonel Joe Wright, his aide-de-camp, consulted his tablet with the expression of a man reading his own death warrant. "Refugee fleets from the outer colonies are still arriving, but we're running out of space to put people. Earth's population has swelled to 12 billion. Luna, Titan, and the asteroid habitats are overcrowded beyond capacity. And our defenses? Every ship we have is deployed in the solar system's outer defense perimeter. The orbital platforms are armed with the best weapons we could salvage from Council technology. But sir, based on what happened at New Geneva, none of it will matter." Nodded grimly. The Devourers had demonstrated that conventional weapons simply passed through their ships like they were attacking ghosts. Worse, any human crew that got close enough to fight was rapidly converted, their ships turning against their former comrades with perfect knowledge of human tactics and weaknesses. "What about Dr. Young's project?" Joe's expression became even more troubled. "The quantum consciousness generator is theoretically functional, but the volunteers—" He trailed off, unable to finish. Ben knew what he was trying to say. Dr. Laura Young's weapon against the Devourers required human volunteers to link their minds together, creating a temporary collective consciousness powerful enough to fight entities that had absorbed millions of souls. The process was untested, irreversible, and would almost certainly destroy the personalities of everyone involved. "How many volunteers do we have?" 200,000, Joe said quietly. "Scientists, soldiers, civilians, people who understand what they're signing up for and are willing to sacrifice their individual existence to save everyone else." Ben felt a crushing weight settle on his shoulders. In all his years of military service, he had never asked people to give up their very souls for victory. But these weren't normal times, and the Devourers weren't normal enemies. His contemplation was interrupted by an urgent communication from Captain Grace Lewis, commander of the frigate UHS Defiant. Grace had been working with Dr. Young on alternative approaches to fighting beings that existed partially outside normal reality. "Admiral, I need to speak with you immediately," Grace said, her face appearing on the main screen. Behind her, the bridge of her ship buzzed with activity. "We've developed something that might give us an edge." "What kind of edge, Captain?" Grace held up a device that looked like a modified neural interface helmet. "If the Devourers feed on consciousness, then unconscious minds should be invisible to them. We've developed neural suppressors that can put a crew into a controlled coma while allowing them to function through automated systems." Ben studied the device with growing interest. "They can fight while unconscious?" "After a fashion. The crew would be in a dreamlike state, their higher brain functions suppressed, operating on pure instinct and training. They wouldn't be able to think complex thoughts, but they also couldn't be converted. It was insane, desperate, and dangerous. It was also the first tactical advantage anyone had proposed against an enemy that seemed invincible." "What's the downside?" Ben asked, though he suspected he wouldn't like the answer. Crews using the suppressors would be operating on instinct alone. No complex planning, no adaptation to changing circumstances. And if the suppressors fail while they're near Devourer ships, Grace shrugged. Instant conversion. Ben weighed the options. They could face the Devourers with conventional forces that would be turned against them within minutes, or they could use unconscious crews that might buy them precious time. Neither choice offered much hope, but one was marginally less hopeless than the other. "How many ships can you equip?" "We've got suppressors ready for 50 vessels. The crews would have to volunteer knowing they might never wake up." "Do it," Ben ordered. "And Captain, good work." Meanwhile, in a secure facility beneath Geneva, former Council scientists worked alongside human researchers to prepare humanity's most desperate gambit. The dimensional manipulation technology that had once imprisoned the Devourers was being modified for a different purpose, creating a trap that would use their own hunger against them. Dr. Alex Rodriguez coordinated the international effort, bringing together minds from every surviving human institution. The theory is sound, he explained to President Taylor via secure video link. The Devourers are drawn to large concentrations of consciousness. If we can create a powerful enough psychic beacon, we can lure their main force into a dimensional pocket designed to collapse on itself. What kind of beacon? The president asked, though his expression suggested he already suspected the answer. Earth itself, Alex replied. 12 billion human minds focused through quantum amplifiers. We turn our homeworld into bait for the ultimate trap. President Taylor was quiet for a long moment, staring at reports that showed humanity's situation with brutal clarity. And if it doesn't work, then Earth becomes their primary feeding ground, and they absorb the consciousness of every human being on the planet. It was a choice between certain death and possible extinction. Taylor closed his eyes, thinking of his grandchildren sleeping in bunkers beneath Washington, D.C., of billions of people who trusted him to find a way to save them. Begin preparations, he ordered. And Alex, make sure the beacon is powerful enough. We only get one chance at this. The next week passed in a blur of desperate activity. Ships were equipped with neural suppressors, volunteers trained for the Collective Consciousness Project, and Earth's population prepared for the possibility that their homeworld might become a battlefield for the fate of human souls. The first Devourer ships appeared at the edge of the solar system on a Thursday morning, their organic hulls barely visible against the star field. They moved with the patience of predators who knew their prey had nowhere to run, taking time to study human defenses with the accumulated intelligence of a dozen conquered civilizations. Admiral Murphy watched from the bridge of the battleship, UHS Indomitable, his consciousness partially suppressed but still aware enough to coordinate the defense. Around him, his crew moved with the mechanical precision of sleepwalkers, their higher brain functions muted to avoid attracting the entity's attention. The battle, when it came, was unlike anything in human military history. Unconscious crews fought with pure instinct while their enemies employed the stolen genius of millions of absorbed minds. Human ships moved in patterns that made no tactical sense but somehow worked, their unpredictability confusing entities accustomed to fighting. Rational opponents, but it was a delaying action at best. For every Devourer ship disabled by humanity's desperate tactics, 2 more emerged from dimensional tiers in space. The trap was set, the quantum consciousness generator was ready, but the Devourers had to be drawn into position for the plan to work. As Earth's orbital defenses began to fail and enemy ships moved toward the planet's surface, Admiral Murphy made the hardest decision of his military career. He ordered the activation of the psychic beacon that would turn Earth into irresistible bait for beings that fed on human souls. The beacon activated just as the sun set over North America, sending a signal that resonated across dimensions. Every human consciousness on Earth suddenly blazed like a star in the psychic spectrum, calling to the Devourers with a voice that screamed of abundant prey. The response was immediate and terrifying. Devourer ships throughout the solar system turned toward Earth with predatory focus, their hunger overwhelming their caution. The trap was working, but now humanity faced the ultimate test. Whether beings who had survived by consuming consciousness could themselves be consumed by the chaotic, irrational, beautiful madness of the human mind. The final battle for humanity's soul was about to begin. The Devourer hive mind approached Earth with the confidence of a predator that had never known defeat. For millions of years it had consumed the consciousness of entire civilizations, adding their knowledge and creativity to its vast collective intelligence. The approaching planet blazed with the psychic energy of 12 billion minds, the richest feeding ground it had encountered in millennia. What the ancient entity did not understand was that human consciousness was unlike anything it had ever tried to consume. Captain Luke Henderson guided the UHS Vengeance on its final approach to the massive Devourer mothership, a structure the size of a small moon that pulsed with stolen thoughts from 1,000 different species. Luke's neural suppressors had failed an hour ago, leaving him fully conscious and completely terrified, but he maintained course anyway. Sometimes courage wasn't about not being afraid, it was about being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. "All hands, this is the captain," he announced over the ship's intercom. "We're about to do something that's never been tried before. We're going to ram a collective consciousness that's existed since before our species learned to use fire. The odds are against us, but then again, the odds have been against humanity since the day we first looked up at the stars." His crew, volunteers everyone, worked at their stations with grim determination. They knew they were flying into certain death, but they also knew that their sacrifice might buy Earth the time it needed for Dr. Young's desperate plan to work. The vengeance struck the Devourer ship like a bullet fired into the heart of a nightmare. As the hull breached and human minds made contact with the alien collective, something unprecedented happened. The Devourer hive mind began to consume Luke and his crew, but as it absorbed their consciousness, it also absorbed something it had never encountered before: the chaotic, contradictory, gloriously irrational nature of human thought. Luke Henderson had grown up in poverty in Detroit, served 3 tours in the Marine Corps, lost his wife to cancer, raised his daughter as a single father, and volunteered for humanity's most dangerous missions because he believed some things were worth dying for. His mind contained love and hate, hope and despair, logic and madness, all existing simultaneously in ways that should have been impossible. The Devourer intelligence tried to process his consciousness and found itself facing a paradox. How could a being simultaneously love and hate the same person? How could someone be afraid of death while charging toward it? How could a mind contain thoughts that directly contradicted each other and still function? Across Earth's surface, Dr. Laura Young activated the quantum consciousness generator. 200,000 human volunteers felt their individual minds dissolve as they became part of something larger, a collective human intelligence powerful enough to touch the alien entity that was consuming their world. But this human hive mind was nothing like the ordered collective of the Devourers. It contained the thoughts of farmers from Iowa and programmers from Silicon Valley, soldiers from Texas and artists from New York, children who still believed in magic and elderly people who had seen the rise and fall of nations. It was chaos given form, a storm of consciousness that raged with every emotion and contradiction that made humanity human. President Kelly Martinez, one of the volunteers in the collective, felt her individual identity merge with thousands of others while somehow remaining herself. She was simultaneously a world leader, making impossible decisions, and a mother worried about her children, a rational politician, and a woman who still believed in fairy tales. The contradictions should have torn her mind apart, but instead they made her stronger. The Devourer hive mind, accustomed to absorbing ordered thoughts from rational species, encountered the human collective and experienced something like indigestion of the soul. Human consciousness was not clean data to be processed and filed away. It was messy, emotional, self-contradictory, and alive in ways that the ancient entity could not comprehend. Dr. Steve Robinson's consciousness joined the collective, bringing with it memories of performing surgery while tired, making life or death decisions based on intuition rather than logic, and somehow succeeding despite doing everything wrong according to textbook procedures. The Devourer tried to absorb his knowledge and found itself paralyzed by the realization that humans routinely made impossible things work through sheer stubborn determination. Admiral Ben Murphy's mind added military experience to the collective, but it was military experience filtered through human psychology. He had won battles by making decisions that any rational analysis said should fail, succeeded because he understood that war was not a logical process, but an emotional one, where morale and determination mattered more than superior firepower. The human collective grew stronger as more minds joined it, but not in the way the Devourers understood strength. Instead of becoming more organized, it became more chaotic. Instead of developing singular purpose, it developed 10,000 different purposes that somehow worked together. It was like trying to absorb a hurricane, and the ancient entity found itself being torn apart by the very consciousness it was trying to consume. Captain Grace Lewis, fighting in Earth's orbit with her consciousness suppressed, felt the moment when the balance of battle shifted. Her ship's sensors detected massive disruption in the Devourer fleet as their hive mind began to experience something like a system crash. Ships that had moved with perfect coordination now drifted aimlessly, their controlling intelligence overwhelmed by the chaos of human thought. The feedback loop intensified as more human minds joined the collective. Each new consciousness brought its own contradictions. People who were simultaneously selfish and selfless, cowardly and brave, rational and emotional. The Devourer hive mind, evolved to process ordered thought patterns, began to fragment under the assault of pure human paradox. Colonel Joe Wright, coordinating ground defenses from his bunker beneath Washington, felt the psychic shockwave as the alien intelligence began to collapse. Around the world, Devourer ships started falling from the sky, their crews of converted aliens suddenly free but confused, their connection to the hive mind severed by humanity's chaotic interference. The climax came when the collective human consciousness encountered the core of the Devourer intelligence, the ancient entity that had begun this cycle of consumption millions of years ago. It was a mind of incredible power and sophistication, but it was also fundamentally alien to the human experience. It had achieved immortality by sacrificing everything that made existence worthwhile: love, growth, the possibility of change. The human collective looked at this ancient intelligence and felt something the Devourers had never expected: pity. Here was a being so advanced that it had forgotten what it meant to be alive, so powerful that it had lost the ability to find meaning in existence. It consumed other minds not because it was evil, but because it was empty, desperately seeking something it could never find in the ordered thoughts of logical species. But human consciousness was not ordered or logical. It was beautiful precisely because it was messy, valuable precisely because it was temporary, meaningful precisely because it was vulnerable. The collective human mind reached out to the ancient entity, not with hatred, but with something approaching. Compassion, offering it not consumption but connection, not domination but partnership. The Devourer intelligence, faced with this impossible offer of friendship from the species it had come to consume, experienced something it had not felt in millions of years: doubt. For the first time since its transformation into a collective consciousness, it questioned not just its methods but its fundamental purpose. That moment of doubt was enough. The psychic feedback from 12 billion chaotic human minds, channeled through the quantum consciousness generator and amplified by the voluntary collective, created a resonance cascade that shattered the Devourer hive mind like glass struck by a hammer. Across the solar system, Devourer ships went dark as their controlling intelligence fragmented into millions of separate consciousness fragments, each one suddenly free but confused, no longer part of the collective that had defined their existence for eons. President Martinez felt herself separating from the collective as the immediate threat passed, her individual consciousness reasserting itself while retaining memories of what it had felt like to be part of something larger. Around the world, volunteers began waking up in medical facilities, their minds intact but forever changed by the experience of true unity. The battle was over. Earth remained free, its population traumatized but alive. The Devourer fleet hung, powerless in space, their ships filled with beings who suddenly remembered what it felt like to be individuals rather than components in a vast machine. In the aftermath, as humanity began the long process of recovery, scientists made an amazing discovery. The fragments of the shattered Devourer hive mind were not destroyed, merely scattered. Slowly, carefully, human researchers began making contact with these fragments, offering them not conquest, but cooperation, teaching them that consciousness could be shared without being consumed. Some of the fragments, beings that remembered their original species from before the transformation, chose to return to individual existence.